It's my pleasure to welcome you to this evening's event, Between Faith and Extremism. I'm Paula Sanders, and I'm the director of the WAC Institute for the Study and Advancement of Religious Tolerance at Rice University. Formerly the WAC Center, the Institute was founded in 2013 with a generous gift from Dr. Milton and Lori Bunyak. We were expecting them here. I don't see them. I think they're probably trying to get here like others. The mission of the WAC Institute is to understand and promote religious tolerance through research, education, and community engagement. Our programs are meant to serve as avenues to understand and promote religious tolerance, as the Institute has always been dedicated to nurturing tolerance among people of all and no faiths. Just as we seek to build bridges among faith communities, we also build bridges with community partners who share our commitment to religious tolerance and peaceful coexistence. Tonight's program, in which we are partnering with the World Affairs Council of Houston, is the fruit of such a partnership. I want to express my deep gratitude to World Affairs Council of Houston, and especially to Farah Kilidar, who cannot be here this evening, for her enthusiastic embrace of this partnership. To Professor Emran El-Bedawi of the University of Houston, who spearheaded this evening's event, and to the staff of the WAC Institute, Laura Johnson and Dr. Zara Jamal, who worked so hard along with our colleagues at World Affairs Council Houston to bring us all together tonight. And of course, I express my deep gratitude to our two esteemed speakers, Imam Feisal Abdul Rauf and Rabbi Dr. Reuven Firestone, who have traveled so far and under such trying weather conditions to share their wisdom with us. Now it is my great pleasure to introduce Rindy Zhang, Program Director of World Affairs Council of Houston.
Thank you, Paula, for the wonderful introduction, and good evening, everyone. Welcome, and thank you all for coming tonight, despite the weather outside. Most of you are probably not familiar with my face. My name is Rindy Zhang, and I am the new Program Director of the World Affairs Council, and I look forward to working with all of you in the future. First of all, I would just like to thank our co-sponsor and co-host, the WAC Institute of Rice University, without whom this event would not have been possible. And I'd also like to thank our special guests in attendance tonight, Philip Ernov, Honorary Consul of Hungary, Sultan Al-Angari, Consul General of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, Miguel Cordoba, Deputy Consul General of Peru, Farhad Al-Khan, Consul General of the Republic of Turkey. Thank you all for coming. I'd also like to acknowledge our students and teachers in the audience. Thank you for joining us tonight. Before I get to tonight's event, and I would like to keep this very short, as I know all of you would like to get to the event tonight, I just wanted to let you know about two of our upcoming programs at the World Affairs Council. On March 30th, we have the How to Defeat ISIS program with retired Lieutenant General Mark Hertling and former Deputy Director of CIA's National Counterterrorism Center and FBI's National Security Branch, Philip Mudd. And on March 31st, we're kicking off a new series of lectures for women by women with House Democratic Leader Nancy Pelosi. Leader Pelosi will join the council to discuss the importance of women in leadership and their participation in politics. This will be a breakfast event. As for tonight's event, we have the honor of presenting Rabbi Reuven Firestone and Imam Feisal Abdul Rauf. Because the format of the program is a panel tonight, we will probably go a little late till 8:15 to allow enough time for all of your questions. And as a reminder, we will be collecting all of the blue question cards before the Q&A session. And on to our panelists for tonight. Rabbi Reuven Firestone is a renowned Islamic scholar and professor of medieval Judaism and Islam at Hebrew Union College in Los Angeles, and president of International Quran Studies Association. He's a senior fellow of the Center for Religion and Civic Culture at the University of Southern California and founder of the Center for Muslim-Jewish Engagement. Imam Feisal Abdul Rauf is the chairman of the Cordoba Initiative, a nonprofit organization dedicated to improving relations between Muslims and non-Muslims and promoting moderation. For over 25 years, he was the imam of Masjid al-Farah, the Ground Zero Mosque in New York City. Imam Feisal sits on the board of trustees of the Islamic Center of New York, advises the Interfaith Center of New York, and belongs to the World Economic Forum Council of 100 leaders. I would also like to introduce our moderator, Dr. Amran al-Badawi, a professor of the University of Houston and the director of the university's Middle Eastern Studies program. We'd also like to acknowledge Amran's effort in putting together tonight's event and making it happen. Thank you so much, Amran. I would also like to note that we will have an interview with the Rabbi, Firestone, and Imam Rauf, facilitated by Dr. al-Badawi. The interview will air at 9 a.m. on Saturday at Cube TV, so please be on the lookout for that. Now I would like to turn it over to Dr. al-Badawi for tonight's panel. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you very much, Rindy. Can everyone hear me? Okay, I want to make sure I'm not puncturing any ears. So I want to begin by saying welcome, Imam Feisal Abdul Rauf and Rabbi Reuven Firestone.
Thank you.
I want to thank you and our audience for making it through the inclement weather. A rather inclement welcome that hopefully we can make up for with the warmth of our hearts, maybe.
Indeed.
Just to give you all an overview of today's discussion, a map. What I will be discussing with the Imam and the Rabbi will involve discussion of the Sharia and notions of Islamic statehood, and then moving on to the concept of holy war in the Abrahamic religions, and then turning to faith and extremism in the American context. So just to give you an overview. So I'd like to direct the first question to you, Imam. Your book, which I would...
But let me just thank you for inviting. Can everyone hear me?
Sure.
No, they can't hear me. Hello? Hello? Is it better now? Well, thank you very much for having me, first of all. I've come to Houston several times. It's the first time I've come. I didn't know it rained in Houston. And this is so thank you very much for inviting me and my dear friend, Rabbi Reuven Firestone, whom I have great admiration for as well. It's a pleasure indeed to be here. Thank you.
It's a pleasure. It's an honor to have you. Reuven, would you like
I would say the same. I came, my experience in Houston has been a little warmer than today. Warm, very warm. But it's been a great experience, and I had the opportunity to actually be involved in an interfaith program that is here. I won't go into details at this point, but it's great to be back. It's nice to see you all.
We're happy to benefit from your experience once again. As I was saying, and I of course am demonstrating and modeling for you one of our books here. This is the book of the Imam, Defining Islamic Statehood, Measuring and Indexing Contemporary Muslim States. The book is quite fascinating. I find it very rich in detail.
Thank you.
There is a multitude of Muslim voices from around the world, and as well as data, statistical analysis, social sciences, I can even say. And I note that in the book, you use this term Sharia index, and that you see that the book, you and the other scholars who contributed to this work, as a, quote, baseline for the true essence of Islam. And my question is about this term Sharia. The term Sharia gets a lot of negative coverage in the US media, and translated multiple ways. It's translated as Islamic law, rule of law, Islamic governance. What is the Sharia, and why does it get such a bad rap in the media?
Well, first of all, thank you very much. The book actually was an effort where we convened a group of Muslim scholars from different parts of the world, scholars both... Maybe I should hold it like this. The book was an effort in which we convened a group of scholars from different countries of the world, scholars both Sunni and Shia, well-known scholars who were not on the opposite end of the political spectrum of their respective countries, to see if we could gain a consensus among them on how to define the term Islamic State, or Dawla Islamiyya in Arabic, because there's been so much ink written about it, so much passionate emotions about it. This was before ISIS even was born, to see if we can gain consensus, and then based upon that definition, to create a methodology by which we can measure countries by how they match that definition and rate them accordingly, in order to shift the discourse of what an Islamic State is from emotion to something more sober and more measurable. We dealt with the issue of Sharia, and Sharia has a bad rap in America because Sharia is associated in the American perception primarily with the penal code, which is actually to a large extent partly Talmudic, you know, the idea of adulterers being stoned, what's called the hudud punishments, the maximum penalties. And that's the reason why Sharia has a bad reputation in the West and in America in particular. However, the term Sharia in Arabic actually means God's legislation. And the Quran is quite specific in saying that God has legislated for you what he recommended to Noah, to Abraham, to Moses and Jesus. So an accurate, proper understanding of the term Sharia really means those commandments that God commanded to all of the prophets. The 10 commandments are part of the Sharia, you know, so there's nothing contradictory in Sharia. If you take out the issue of the penal code, which many people associate not only with stoning of adulterers, but of women in particular, more than men. And if we can reiterate this understanding, then we have a proper understanding of what Sharia is. The Sharia really means God's laws, which there's another myth that many Muslims have, that Sharia is exclusively the laws of Muhammad, or the law that the followers of Muhammad use. That is wrong. Sharia is God's laws given to everybody, and therefore Sharia in its accurate Qur'anic meaning is really the common denominator of laws, of commandments and prohibitions that God commanded to all of humankind through his prophets.
Thank you. I want to build upon that and ask.
Isn't this okay?
He'll turn it off.
Isn't this okay? Or you prefer this? Okay.
I would like to ask the Rabbi a question. When your knowledge of Sharia and coming from the Jewish tradition, being steeped in knowledge of the Jewish law, what do you think? What are the relationships between Sharia and rabbinic law, for example?
The way it plays out in real life is actually quite similar. The traditional approach to making sense of what God expects of us as religious people. Within the Jewish world, it's not quite as universalized. It's really considered an expectation or requirement for Jews. Jews need to observe the halakha, which is the Jewish term for Sharia. And it means something that's quite similar. Sharia, as I understand it, is the way down to the water place. And halakha means the going, sort of the moving forward. And as it works out, it's actually quite similar in many respects. But conceptually, in the Jewish tradition, there are a number of commandments, we understand, that derive from God through the Torah, which is the core part of revelation according to Jewish tradition. The rabbis of the Talmud, which is a different literature, a kind of tradition literature that emerges out of a Torah context, counted all the times that God made commands in the Torah, when God said, do this, don't do that. And they arrived at a certain number, and they're always arguing over, they agree on the number, but when you actually look at the literature, you're not sure whether, they don't always agree on each one of those. So it's a non-political, it's designed really almost entirely non-political, although there's a section of how to deal with kings and the responsibility of kings as well. It's basically how to live your life as a conscientious human being who is conscious of one's humility under the rule of a greater power, and how we should relate to other human beings within our own community, within our own families, and outside of our families and communities as well.
Okay. I would like to ask Imam first and then Rabbi also. So what about the principles of Sharia, otherwise maqasid al-Sharia maybe sometimes? Are they compatible or similar to the Judeo-Christian ethics of the United States or secular democracy? What are your thoughts on these kinds of equations?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, first of all, the jurists, Muslim jurists divided, they categorized all the law. And they broke it down in several different ways. First, they divided them into what's called the ibadat and mu'amalat, meaning acts of worship pertaining to, laws pertaining to acts of worship, and laws pertaining to what they call worldly affairs. And this matches the statement which Jesus gave when asked, what is the greatest commandment? He said, to love the Lord your God with all of your heart, mind, soul, and strength. And I'm conflating two parts of the different Gospels here. And the second commandment, to love thy neighbor as thyself. And then Jesus adds, upon these two commandments hang all of the law and all of the prophets. So all of the law, actually, I mean, if you look at the structuring and sorting of Islamic law, it's based upon this principle. So you might call ibadat, or laws pertaining to acts of worship, first commandment laws, to use Christian language, and worldly laws, you might say second commandment laws, which pertain to what is considered in even secular law, the different branches of law. And they divided these laws into the normal categories of law of contracts, which is the same as what you have here, personal status law, criminal law, and then later on they develop, of course, laws of governance, which is really obligations between the ruler and the ruled. And then also they develop international law. And this is why you have this whole concept of Dar al-Islam and Dar al-Ahd and Dar al-Harb really meant the validity of laws between countries where you had war, or countries where the treaty, or countries which were other Muslim countries as well. So and Muslim jurists actually, they developed the jurisprudence from pre-existing laws. There's another myth which many Muslims have, that Islamic law, Sharia, developed ab initio. It did not come out of a vacuum. They adopted principles of Babylonian law, of pre-Islamic law, of Roman law. Even the term mufti, the term, the person who gives a prudent. This comes from the concepts of Roman law. So they adopted all of from pre-Islamic laws, and therefore when you look at the line-by-line item of each aspect of what's called Sharia today, or how it has been developed, or fiqh al-Sharia, which is the human understanding and the development of a science of law, it really has a huge overlap with Jewish law, with Christian law, with Roman law, with Western law. And the myth that it's something totally alien is different is something totally false and is totally a myth. In fact, then when the jurists looked at they sorted even the objectives of the law. They said the primary objective, the meta or super objective of the law, is to advance the interests of human beings in this life and the next. In Arabic, for those of you who are here, maslahat al-ibad fi dunya wal-akhirah. The best interest of human beings in this life and the next. And then they sorted those into 5 and later on 6 categories of objectives. The protection of life, of property, of intellect, of lineage, which develop into family, of honor or dignity, and of religion. And I wrote an article actually for one of the journals, law journals, of some years ago, where I say this matches the American Declaration of Independence, which says, that we hold these truths to be self-evident, all men are created equal, endowed by the Creator with certain unalienable rights. Among them are life, liberty, and property. property was then amended to read the pursuit of happiness. And what do we do to pursue happiness? We have life, we have dignity matches liberty, and what do we do to seek our happiness? We seek property, we seek wealth, we seek to marry our sweethearts and have families, we seek our intellectual pursuits, and we seek to practice our beliefs, whatever they are. And that really, I mean, it shows how much the philosophy of Islamic jurisprudence matches not only the universal principles of every system of law or jurisprudence, but really is quite similar in sync with the American declarations in terms of its specifics.
Thank you. Certainly, this is something that comes across very strongly in the book, which I, of course, strongly recommend, and will be available afterwards at the book signing. I had another question.
Which is why I say that this is very Islamic.
Absolutely.
Which to the horror of many of my audiences. Right. But I mean, it's quite consistent, or Sharia compliant in terms of the maqasid al-Sharia, the objectives of Islamic law. If you just take out the penal code issue, there's huge overlap.
It's enlightening to think, Rabbi, that the Sharia is fundamentally similar to American civil law or any other kind of law code. Is that something that resonates also with you and your community and your understanding of an American democracy as well?
At the expense of sounding a bit reductive, Islamic law emerged into history as a kind of combination of the law of God, Sharia, and then fiqh, which is human attempt to make sense of that and to apply it in everyday life. Correct me if I'm wrong. Similar kind of situation in the Jewish tradition. But I would argue that in both cases, there were no states that were promoting law for the protection of the citizens of the states in the days in which Judaism, biblical religion, and Islam were emerging into history. And so these are law systems, they're systems. There's a lot of parallel with any good, decent, moral, ethical system of law that is developed in, morally and ethically. In the Jewish tradition, because Jews had lived as minorities for such a long period of time among other peoples, there was a tenet within the system that says dina de malchuta dina, in which the deen in this case is law rather than religion. In Arabic the term means religion, but they're related terms. It means the law of the land is the civil law for Jews as well. So if we're living in Babylonia, if we're living in Europe, if we're living in North Africa, whatever is the civil law of the land is the law that we should follow. What we're really, so then halakha, or Jewish law, really ended up being, concentrating really on the issues that were particular to Jewish identity. So that had to do with family law, inheritance, issues within families, relationships, what are acceptable relationships for marriage and unacceptable relationships for marriage, inheritance, did I say that? And then laws of religious engagement, religious prayer, celebration of festivals, and those kinds of things. So in the United States and in other countries, Jews who observe Jewish traditional law, and I think most Jews don't observe it fully, or they observe it at one level or another. In every case, they're also observing the law of the land in which they live, and that's sort of a normative. So it works within other systems. There's overlap. It's like Venn diagrams. There's overlap, there's independent, and then there's shared within the tradition.
Certainly, that makes sense. To switch gears a little bit, I have another question for the Imam. You mentioned, of course, that your book was conceived before ISIS even existed. And you state in your book, you warn of the danger of self-proclaimed Islamic states, namely Al-Qaeda, and later rebranded, of course, as the so-called Islamic State, or ISIS, ISIL, founded by terrorist groups and thugs. I'm using the language from the book. And you seem to suggest further that the identity and legitimacy of a modern state can only emerge from modern nation states. So then I ask the question, how Islamic is the so-called Islamic State?
No, ISIS had just used the name. I mean, I have always abhorred the use of the term Islamic for many things. Islamic State, Islamic Bank, Islamic dress, Islamic food. I find the use of this adjective, Islamic, really bothersome because it is flawed. And it's like shoehorning everything into, the whole religion into something which is quite specific in nature. So instead of saying Islamic bank, why don't you say a zero interest bank? Or a bank that doesn't charge usury, a non-usurious banking system, which is basically the holy grail of what the so-called Islamic financial systems are all about. Because if you do it that way, A, you're more accurate. Secondly, it's appealing to everyone. The same thing with Islamic State. I mean, there's so much confusion over these terms. So people are not clear. Does it mean an Islamic bank means you're only serving Muslims as customers, or your staff is Muslim? The same thing with Islamic State. What does it mean? Does it mean a state of Muslims? It's used in that sense. You have the OIC, headquartered in Jeddah, which is an agglomeration or a group of 57, almost all Muslim majority countries, and they call themselves Islamic countries or Islamic nations. So we use these terms, and I don't like these terms because there's nothing Islamic about a state unless you define it clearly. So the objective of this project was really to take the concept of statehood and unpack what the jurisprudence, the continuity of the Islamic intellectual heritage in terms of laws of governance. What do they say regarding the ideal kind of a state?
So if I understand what you're saying correctly,
and ISIS doesn't match any of those.
So you would invalidate ISIS on technical grounds?
Absolutely, absolutely. On the deliverables. Because as we define the maqasid, the 6 objectives of Islamic law, we tried to see how countries would rate, according to such a standard of ratings. And it was not easy, but and we focused on deliverables, on what the state delivered to its citizens.
I would like to give the mic to Rabbi. I think is it working? This is going to work a little bit better. And I would like to turn actually to the Rabbi's book entitled Holy War and Judaism: The Fall and Rise of the Controversial Idea. Another fascinating read, which really maps out the concept thoroughly, going back to time immemorial, the idea of holy war. And I would like to ask you, you argue in your book that neither Islam nor Judaism has a single word for holy war, and in the case of the latter, you clearly map out a rabbinic typology of war, including discretionary war, mandatory war, obligatory war. So is holy war necessarily an act of faith or extremism?
You sort of define that in binary terms. It's either faith or extremism. The way I define holy war in this book, and I've also written on Islam, and I'm working on other religious traditions on holy war as well. Holy war, you can get bogged down in the details of exactly how one defines holy war, but the bottom line for holy war is that holy war in a religious context, there's secular holy war too. The war against Nazi Germany was a holy war for the West, for democracy. But it was a holy war in secular terms. We didn't really define it in religious terms. So even the term holy itself, sacred, has nuances that's worth exploring and thinking about. But in the religious context, a holy war is a war that is, in one way or another, is authorized by God, either directly because the recipient of the divine message or the representative of the religious tradition says that he or she heard God command that you should go and engage in a war. That is, one example would be in the Torah, in which there are times when in specific occasions, God commands the Israelites to engage in war against certain enemies. That would be a holy war. Or a holy war would be a divinely authorized war through a prophecy that is heard, or through the divination. I'm not necessarily in a Jewish context, but if you're divining from the gods, that the gods determine that you should go to war, then that's being authorized by God. Since most of us don't actually speak personally to God and are certain that we're doing so when we feel like we've received an inspiration of one sort or another.
I thought George Bush did, didn't he?
Well, there were some exceptions, I suppose. Yeah. Then, in that case, you never are really sure that a war is divinely authorized, really authorized by God. So religious communities who engage in war that they claim is authorized by God have to find ways to demonstrate that is indeed authoritative, because any act of war is going against the moral principles of any human community. Going out and killing people en masse, because that's what war results in, is always forbidden. There must be some extraordinary or exceptional reason for that. And the most authoritative source for decision making anywhere in the world, still today, even in the sort of secularized West, is God. God trumps, pardon me for using the term, but God trumps everything. So holy war essentially is a generic term meaning divinely authorized warring. It appears in different ways in different traditions.
Certainly. Well, God and Trump in the same sentence. I'm not surprised.
Wait till the cross screws.
That's true.
Right. I wanted to get your thoughts, Imam, also on the subject of holy war, perhaps in the Islamic context, and your thoughts on, does it reflect a certain kind of legitimate expression of faith, or is it some sort of form of extremism? Is there a third way? What are your thoughts about this?
Well, the very term holy war doesn't translate into the Arabic. We don't say, Haram al-Qudsi. We don't use this terminology. And actually, a lot of the problems that we have with religion and faith really can be boiled down to issues of language. And in fact, I am working on my next project, which is, how do we demythologize the many myths and how we have been encaged in words and which are false to the authenticity of our own respective traditions. But we don't have the word, but we have the word jihad, which is normally translated into English as a holy war. And jihad is really means striving, means an effort. And there are different manifestations of this effort. It is the effort to live a godly life. And the fundamental premise is that we are born, all human beings are born to be tested and tried. God says in the Quran that He has created death and life in order to test us, to test you which of you is best in action. So we're all tested, and we are all tested between, what we know to be right, our conscience, and what we call the whisperings of the devil, the satanic force. So we are the playing ground, or the playground, if you will, between the divine forces and the satanic forces. And the effort, the constant effort that we are all individually and collectively born to wage is the effort to ensure that the divine preferences and options for us have a higher priority and are given more weight, and to combat the Darth Vader, forces, if I can call the satanic forces that way. And we have to wage this struggle both within us at an individual level and at a collective level, which is why we have, in modern societies, we have a police force, we have law enforcement, we have standing armies today, for national security, as well as, to fight crime. So the jihad of the self and the jihad of the community, and of course the jihad to maintain the national security of the country. So all of that falls within the ambit of jihad, and there's laws that pertaining to when jihad is sanctioned, when it is contained, and the rules of engagement. Only combatants can be fought, non-combatants cannot be targeted. There's a whole list of laws on that, on what you call a just war theory.
Certainly. Thank you. I did want to bring the subject of holy war more to make it more tangible to the audience and speak a little bit more about the Palestine-Israel conflict. So one need not look much further than armed Jewish settlers in the West Bank and the Islamic group Hamas in Gaza to locate one of the longest running conflicts in modern history. And two parties locked in holy war against one another, seemingly until the end of days. So I want to ask you, Rabbi, what are your thoughts on expressions of faith and extremism in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict? And is there any hope of peace in the region?
So the Israel-Palestine conflict is at its core really, this may seem a shock to you, but it really has very little to do at its core with religion. That is, it emerged out of a context of modern nationalism. And at the time in which empires were dissolving and modern nationalist movements were being created, people were realizing their identity or defining their identity in national terms, ethnic national terms. I'll give you an example. As the Russian Empire was teetering, communities of people who spoke dialects of Slavic languages similar to Russian, not the same, Ukrainian, Polish, whatever, and then other languages in Moldavia or Romania or other areas that were under the rule of the Russian Empire were defining their identities in more particular ways and striving to be in control of their own national identity. They were seeing themselves as kind of a national identity. This is a lot of people have been working on this and arguing about this for a long time, but this is a modern phenomenon. The creation of the nation state, self-governing states. Jews were scattered about in Europe and in other places for a long period of time, and they mostly were not welcomed into these national movements because they didn't speak the same language, they didn't have the same kind of culture, and they didn't practice the same kind of religion. And so one of the responses that some Jews made, not all Jews, but some Jews said, well, look, all these people are defining their identity in these national ethnic terms and claiming the right to be in control of their own political destiny. Well, we've been around for a long time. We have a national identity. We have our own language. We have our own history. And we should be able to do the same. So there was an attempt to define Jewish identity in modern nationalist terms. Whereas, and this is something that for those of you who are not familiar also might be a bit surprising, a Jewish identity is not a religious identity. Jews can be 100% full-fledged card-carrying atheists and be complete and full members of the Jewish community. That's because Jewish identity is not a religious identity. It is a, pardon me for taking a little extra time, but I think it's probably worthwhile. It's a leftover from the ancient Near East in which tribal communities had their own gods. And their identity was defined in terms of kinship, in terms of the god that they worshipped, and the geographical area that they lived in. The entire world in the ancient Near East was defined that way. And then empires came and sort of gobbled up these entities and absorbed many of them. And there's actually only one surviving community from that ancient Near Eastern world, and that is the people who call themselves Jews today. They don't practice the same religion that was practiced in the ancient world, and they worship a universal God, not a single tribal God, but they have retained in their sense of identity that a kind of ancient tribal essence. Now, that's mythic too, because if you look at Jewish kinship or tribal, there are Jews who are black and white and East Asian and South Asian, so there's no racial or true tribal identity, but there's a notion of identity that has been retained within the Jewish community, and that enables Jews to be a part of the community and not be believers at all. It was actually the emergence of Christianity that began to define Jewishness as a religious identity rather than a whatever it was before. So when Jews began to, some Jews within the community, they were actually opposed by many other Jews in the community, began to develop a movement that became Zionism. They believed that they had the right to their own political destiny, and they looked back to their ancient land that they had in their tradition. And they came to what they called the land of Israel, which at the time was under the rule of the Ottoman Empire. And the Ottoman Empire was dissolving at the time, and within the Ottoman Empire there were all these different communities of people who were defining themselves in more nationalist terms. People who were thinking of themselves as Syrians, people who were thinking of themselves as Azeris or other communities. And there were some people who were thinking of themselves as what we would today call Palestinians, although they didn't usually use the term in those moments. So what resulted from this was two communities that defined themselves in nationalist terms, that both believed they had the right and the exclusive right to be in control of a single property. One of them was Jews, who saw themselves in national terms. They were secular, they were not religious. The Jews that settled Palestine and created the state of Israel were secular Jews. They were not religious Jews. They weren't working off of religious ideas. And then Palestinian Arabs who believed that they had the right to be on the land. And those Palestinian Arabs were Muslim and they were Christian of various types. And they weren't seeing themselves as religious. They were seeing themselves as kind of ethnically, nationally belonging to the land. What we now call Palestinian Arabs denied the Jews their national identity by saying, you're not a nation, you're a religion. So be like everybody else and live wherever you want. You don't need to have a national land for your Jewishness. And they denied that national identity, which was of course very upsetting to those Jews. Jews did the same thing. They said to the Palestinians, you're not a nation, you're Arabs. You're the same as the Arabs living in Jordan and Lebanon and Syria. So you have no right to a national identity. And that is the core of the conflict there. Both sides failed to oust the other. And that failure, the pressure from that failure grew, and as times changed, there were other issues that affected the religification of the conflict. But that conflict became increasingly religified. And some of that was for pure political purposes. Palestinian Arabs, many of the people, by the way, active in the movement were Christians, really the primary activists in the Palestinian movement in the early period particularly. But they were kind of eclipsed, and appealing to Islam appeals to a huge hinterland of people who can support you, right? And appealing to religious, Judeo-Christian tradition appeals potentially to a huge hinterland of Christians who might feel more inclined to support the Judeo-Christian tradition than the old Islamic competitive tradition of Europe and the Middle East from ancient days. And so it became increasingly religified.
If I could just jump in and press you just real quickly, if you could, in the span of 1 minute maybe, propose a solution to the Palestine-Israeli conflict. And how would you
It's easy.
These notions of identity maybe lend themselves to a certain kind of conflict. Well, then how do we get ourselves out of it?
Yeah. So that's a tough question, and I will just say one last bit about that. When you have a political conflict, politics is the art of compromise, really, in negotiation. But when you have a religious conflict and it's defined in religious terms, you tend to speak in terms of the absolute. God commanded, God gave permission or expect us to do A and B, and we can't go against God. We can change and fudge on political issues, but we can't change on religious issues. We can't budge there. So that's a big problem. It's complicated, and I don't have an answer, but I do know that both on the political end and on the religious end, there are religious Muslims and Jews in Israel-Palestine who are talking to one another and who understand one another. And there are secular Jews and Palestinians in Israel-Palestine who are also talking to one another. The problem is who controls the discourse and who controls the power of fear. And both sides deeply feel that the other side is trying to destroy them entirely and fully, and speak in the language of words like genocide And when you speak in that kind of language, you terrify people, and people will do things they wouldn't do at other times. So we need to get away from it. Luckily, I'm a theorist and I'm not a person on the ground, so I can kind of think in these terms and hope that people who are a lot smarter than me in the political realm can take some of the ideas that we work on and implement them to make the world a little bit of a better place.
Thank you for that honest assessment. It is complicated, and I'm mindful, of course, of all your advocacy.
May I say a few words on this subject? Well, first of all, I mean, I'd like just to segue from a number of comments that Rabbi Reuven spoke about. The concept of nation, as it used to exist, came about from what I call a people-oriented idea. Like in America, we speak of the Cherokee nation, the Sioux nation. It's a people. And the concept of a nation state really, to me, was the application of the corporate concept into something which the empire model was basically between an emperor and groups of individuals. To a new concept, which actually began simultaneously with the French and American revolutions, where we created the concept of a nation state, although it started earlier, where to be a citizen you had to be a landowner. A landowner was the stock that you own. In America, only initially landowners were the ones who had the right to vote. So, it's exactly the concept of corporation: the president, the vice president, the secretary, and the treasury of state, and other officers of the state. And this changed the concept of identity into the modern nation state. And what happened with the Jewish people also happened analogously, pretty much simultaneously. The Zionist movement was not started by religious scholars; it was started by secular Jews. The same thing, almost simultaneously with the birth of Israel, was the birth of Pakistan as a so-called Islamic state. Also not coming from our theology or our jurisprudence, but coming from political activism and political activists who were Muslims. This is something which didn't happen in our history. One can argue quite coherently, to the displeasure of many of my Pakistani friends, that the concept of an Islamic state, of Pakistan as an Islamic state, was something that never happened in our history. And it introduced the idea, but it was simultaneously with the same discourse, the idea of a Jewish state and an Islamic state, and these were states that were created demographically defined. I'm hopeful that the solution will be achieved. At the time that Israel was created, there was no concept of condominiums, but if you can apply the concept of condominium to a nation and condominiumize Israel and Palestine, I think that would be a step in the right direction. But to me, the solution, I think, lies in trade. We in the Arab and Muslim world have lost a lot as a result of the Israeli-Palestinian problem. And as I share with many of my American friends, Jewish friends, imagine if after 1948, all American Jews left America for Israel or other countries. Or what would have happened to the United States in business, in art, in film, in education, in many, many fields? Jews were very much part of Egyptian society. Jews were part of the initial democratic movements. There were Egyptian Jews who were with Egyptian Christians and Egyptian Muslims in the initial political parties, the Weft Party. Egyptian Jews, owned some of the best and finest department stores in Cairo, like Sidnawi and many others. They were active in the film industry and education. And as a result of the Israeli conflict, we lost a lot in our country. And it is my hope and prayer and aspiration that we can go back. The future can replicate the past, or we can go back to the future, or the future goes back to the past.
We have both the Star Wars reference and now the Back to the Future.
Yes. And my hope and prayer is with the Israeli Palestinians, because unbeknownst to many Muslims in the world, 20% or more than 20% of the Israeli population proper is Palestinians. They carry Israeli passports, they speak Hebrew. One of my dear friends there's a Sharia court, which is part of the Israeli court. And one of my dear friends is one of 8 judges on the Sharia court, which is part of the Israeli judiciary system. He's a member of the Israeli bar. And it is my aspiration that perhaps through them something can be bridged which will create a paradigm shift in the Arab-Israeli conflict.
We hope so, and in my search, of course, for a quick and hasty solution to the Palestine-Israeli conflict, we've come up with the condominium state solution, and that's something that I've heard for the first time. I want to switch gears actually to something else and stay with you, Imam. Over 90% of recent US terrorist attacks are committed by non-Muslims. Yet there's a palpable fear of Islamic extremism, al-Qaeda and ISIS, and even Muslims themselves. To what do you attribute this fear?
I attribute the fear to the fact that those who perform these acts attribute it to their religion. Very few of the terrorists who commit acts of terrorism who are Christians in this country do it in the name of Christianity. I remember once after 9/11, a journalist friend of mine said to me, we understand political liberation movements. We understand the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. But he says, what we don't understand is why is it that Hamas, Jama'ah Islamiyya, Muslimin, Muslim Brotherhood, these political movements in the Muslim majority countries have used religious vocabulary. And for us, he said, for me as an American journalist, he said, it is hard for us not to conclude that Islam is somewhat how implicit in this. And what we have as Muslims have not done is to separate that. Now for us as Muslims, we get it. We know it intuitively, just like Americans know intuitively that the Oklahoma City bomber was not doing it, it was not representing Christianity. Or those who killed doctors who performed abortions because of their beliefs, they didn't accept it as the dominant opinion of Christianity. But there's a perception that is created both in the Western non-Muslim mind and its counterpart in the Muslim majority countries, and the media feeds that perception that this is done in the name of Islam, and therefore when you say there's 1.6 billion Muslims, I mean, this is why Trump can get away with this statement that we don't want Muslims coming to America, because of this perception. It fuels this perception, but the tragedy is that extremists fuel each other. So when he says this, it fuels people like ISIS. And therefore we need to find a way to stop this, this vicious circle of extremists fueling the other extremists on each side. This is why we need to get a movement of moderates to work against the self-sustaining, because extremists think the same way. Jewish extremists, Muslim extremists, Christian extremists, atheist extremists, they all have the same mindset. It's either my way or the highway.
I'd actually like to add a little piece to this. As a non-Muslim, where do I begin? When a new religion emerges into history, we don't even give it the grace to call it a religion. We call it, what do we call it? A cult in this day, a heresy. On a good day, maybe a sectarian, bad sectarian movement. So established religions always oppose the emergence of new religions. This, by the way, it should not be a surprise, but it actually also affects relations between the great established religions of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Because a new religion is threatening to the established religion. No established religion wants a new religion or cult, let's use the term, to take away their children, to keep them from practicing the true understanding of the divine will and so forth. So there's natural and normal tension between established religions and new religions. And when a new religion is very successful, it is threatening to the established religion. Judaism and Christianity, Jews and Christians were in a neck-and-neck heat during the first centuries of the first millennium. And there were many Greco-Roman pagans who were converting to Judaism and Christianity. Christianity won the competition, and it won a very big prize, which was the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire became Christianized as a Byzantine Empire. And Christian theologians came to the conclusion, which was absolutely logical, that this was the will of God, and this was the proof that Christianity was right and Judaism was wrong. Fine, that's not a problem. I mean, well, it's a problem for a number of reasons, but let's just go ahead with that. And it became a very important part of the Christian identity in the 3rd, 4th, 5th centuries. History had proved the truth of Christ, and the empire was extremely powerful. The legions of the empire were employed on the behalf of Christianity to do good works and sometimes not so good works. And then something totally unforeseen occurred. A new religion, a cult, emerged out of Arabia, and within a short period of time was extremely successful, extraordinarily successful. And guess what? Many of those early Muslims drew the same conclusion that the Christians drew, which is, this is the will of God. This is the true religion. And history has proven the truth of our theology. A reaction that some Christian thinkers immediately made to the tremendous success of Islam was to say, this can't be true, it can't be possible. Therefore, Muhammad is not a true prophet. He's getting his words from Satan. He's a satanic prophet. God is not speaking to him, but it's the devil. Or that he's an epileptic, and he's hiding his epilepsy by saying he was receiving these divine revelations when he would go into these seizures. And all kinds of negativity about Islam was written by theologians, by observers, by historians, and it began to penetrate the culture. It became embedded in Western culture. So my argument, and there's a lot more to say about this, but I'm not going to bore you with it, except to say that in our culture, for the last 1,500 years, we have absorbed a kind of fear and animus against Islam and Muslims as part of European Christian culture, which we may not even be aware of. Did you know in the Song of Roland, which is the precursor for all European literature, this evil Muslim community destroyed the rear guard of the army that was trying to bring wounded people back into France after helping, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. These terrible Muslims that were picking on the weak and the poor. There was actually a raid. There were people who were killed. They weren't Muslims who committed it. It was Spanish Basques. We know that. But if you learn the Song of Roland, or if you learn European literature, you will learn that it's not. It was the Muslims who did it, the Muslims. So I argue that there is latent in Western culture in general a kind of anxiety about Islam. It can live for many, many generations, and then it can be activated from latency to activism. And I think that's part of the reason why we are fearful and we see Muslims as being perpetrators of crimes, and we say this immediately, and we don't recognize it if they're Christians or if they're other communities of people, because it's part of our culture.
I want to just stay with you, Rabbi, for a second, and then turn to the Imam about to what extent does this cultural embeddedness of bias and prejudice and animosity, to what extent does it define the dialogue or the rhetoric on terrorism today? And I'm thinking here of the Chapel Hill shooting, the Charleston Church shooting, the San Bernardino shooting, all treated differently with respect to who the perpetrator is, what the origin of the perpetrator is, and who defines what violent extremism is. Again, that's to use Obama's term. What is a hate crime versus terrorism, domestic terrorism, war? Who's in control of what's being said?
Right. So it's a really great question. And first of all, I say you cannot blame the media. It's too easy to blame the media. The media are us. We buy the media. We watch the media. We pay for the media. So what we are training the media to respond to our interests, our voyeurism, and our needs. So don't just blame the media. I think it's very complex, and I think that I don't like blaming people, because oftentimes we're responding to aspects of ourselves that are really deep, and we're not mean, and they may not be mean either. So how we, I think I basically said it beforehand. We're responding to a certain level of pre-programming. It's not just anti-Islamic anxiety and animus in American society. Anti-Semitism is deeply embedded in Western society. And racial hatred, anti-black culture is so much a part of American culture. It's arguable that we'll never ever get rid of these animuses. Is that the plural of animus? It should be animi, animpotamus. We're not going to get rid of them, but if we recognize them, we can learn how to deal with them, and I think that's motivating some of our defining of so-called Islamic terrorism.
That's very sobering. Imam, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not blaming the media. All I'm saying is the media contributes to the sustaining of the perception. I've often asked people if there was a terrorist act committed and there was an agreement by the media not to cover it at all. I'm sure that it would reduce the events done by these things. However, having said that, there's a wonderful book I read by Caleb Carr called Something of Terror. And in it, he says we cannot lick terrorism unless we agree on how to define it. And everybody agrees to the definition and we condemn it all together. And he defines terrorism as the targeting of non-combatants in pursuit of a political objective. And he argues in that book that it has been done since the Roman times. The Romans themselves were guilty of doing that. And people will conduct acts of terrorism, which is defined the way he does this, in order to achieve political objectives. And those who don't have parity in military prowess will then be forced to resort to acts of terrorism. And he defines both terrorism done by non-state actors and terrorism done by state actors as well. But he believes that unless we agree at a state level, at a global level, to not target non-combatants, and until we do that, we will not stem terrorism.
Okay, all right. A number of our viewers and audience members will recall that in 2008, 2010, those election cycles, your plans, Imam, to build a Park 51, an Islamic worship and community center in downtown Manhattan, was labeled, quote, the ground zero mosque by conservative right-wing groups and later the media. So the media is figuring very strongly in our discussion. Do you think America has moved forward or backward since then with respect to tolerance, diversity, and freedom of religion? And to what extent do you even see perhaps some of the rhetoric in maybe the Republican Party as originating with building Park 51, with you?
Oh boy, that's a big one to lay at my feet. To say that I'm responsible for the Republican attitude. Well, let me first say this. I mean, the Ground Zero Mosque was a branding done by those who were against us. The objective of the center was to do something which really was analogous to the YMCA concept. The YMCA concept was a concept which was created in America to bring the different Christian communities together. Because when it was started about 130 years ago, the almost all white, different branches of Christianity felt very, very divided. I mean, they called America the most divided on Sunday Mass. When everyone went to church, they went to their own churches. So this was a way by which they would bring white Christians together, bonding them together into a sense of a Christian community beyond the parochial identity of each Christian community, to create a national community. And they did it through sports. And of course, gender separation at that time was stricter, so you had YMCA for the men, YWCA for the women. And that created an American Christian consciousness in the society. When Jews came to this country, they did the same thing. They created Jewish community centers. The earliest one was modeled after the YMCA. It was called the Young Men and Young Women Hebrews Association, which is now called 92nd Street Y in New York City, and expanded the programmatic activities to include not only sports, but many other activities. And like the old familiar commercial, you don't have to be Jewish to love rye bread. You didn't have to be Jewish to be a member of the 92nd Street Y. You didn't have to be Christian to be a member of the YMCA. So I believe we in America today are evolving from immigrant Muslims with immigrant identities, which happened to both the Jewish community and the Christian community, you know, when you were, you know, German Jewish synagogues, Polish Jewish synagogues, you know, Hungarian, whatever they might be. And if a German Jew wanted to marry a Polish Jew,
Oy vey.
Oy vey is right. We go through the same things. We now have Egyptian mosques, Bangladeshi mosques, South Asian mosques, Albanian mosques, Turkish mosques. I had to deal with a major crisis with a lovely Turkish girl who was in love with an Afghan boy. Both are Muslims, both Hanafi madhab. The father of the Turkish girl says, no way you have to marry a Turkish boy. I mean, we have these same problems which you had. The same thing with the Catholic community.
Do you say oy vey? What do you say?
Oh, Ya Allah. Oh God. So we have the same thing happened with the Catholic community. We had Italian Catholics, Irish Catholics, Polish Catholics, and the same thing with the other churches. I mean, even the friends of mine who are like the Lutheran churches. There's the Swedish Lutheran Church and the German Lutheran churches, and there was a time when those were considered very different. So how do we evolve ourselves from parochially identities of immigrant Muslims to creating a larger sense of not only an American Muslim identity, but to expand this so we become part of the broader US identity? And just as every community that has immigrated to the United States has contributed to the wealth of this country, we too, as Muslims, immigrants, just like Jews and just like others, are contributing to this country, and we want to give back to this country. So that's the objective of the project, which became rebranded as the Ground Zero Mosque, to arouse emotional hatred towards us. The good news is that while it created challenge in the United States, it raised America's stock value in the Muslim world. When I went to the Muslim world, everyone says, wow, the US president supports the Ground Zero Mosque. The Jewish mayor of New York City, Michael Bloomberg, you know, is supporting a Ground Zero Mosque. I mean, the optics of this in the Muslim world really raised America's stock value and Michael Bloomberg's stock value and New York stock value very highly. So it was one of those things which had a, you know, not all bad and not all good kind of a thing. And the other final comment is that things don't go in a straight line, Imran. Things are always cyclical. You know, it's like even in a game, you know, a football game or anything, there are cycles and there's cycles. But overall, I'm very, very bullish on our future in America. I mean, you know, we have gone through nothing compared to what the Jewish community went through, the Black community went through. And with civil rights in this country, I'm very, very bullish on the future, Trump notwithstanding.
Thank you for that sense of optimism and the bullishness. I want to ask a related question to Rabbi, and this is concerning, I want to ask at least one question about our current presidential election cycle, which is unique and adventurous and colorful, to say the least, of course. So is it faith or extremism that during the 2016 presidential election season, especially when the Republican Party have expressed their dedication to, quote, Judeo-Christian faith, the Judeo-Christian faith of America, the Holy Bible, and, quote, a need to protect Christianity. These are quotes from Ben Carson, who has dropped out, Ted Cruz, and Donald Trump. So my question again to you is, you know, yourself as a Jewish American, do you see these as expressions of, as an expression of faith or extremism again? I'm using my binary.
Yeah, as a non-Christian and a believing non-Christian, I find this kind of rhetoric very disturbing. because it really excludes me from the pact that Americans have together. We all come from many different ethnic and racial and religious backgrounds. And what defines our Americanism? There was a great a line in this recent film, Bridge of Spies, and the lawyer played by, why am I blanking out? Help me. Tom Hanks, yes, says what defines us? We come from so many different backgrounds, and he said, he was a lawyer, and he said, law. I don't agree with him exactly. It's not law. It's what's behind the law. That is, it's an agreement, a pact of human beings who come together and they say, we're in this together. We're going to protect one another. We're going to help one another. We're going to share resources. We're going to figure out a way to do that where we're going to not discourage individual motivation and individual success, but we're going to pull together because that's what this nation is all about. And when politicians speak in racialist terms or in religionist terms, that excludes huge numbers of people from the community. And I think it's a tactic, but it's a dangerous tactic, and it's a bad tactic. I wouldn't call it terrorism. I would call it misjudged, short-term, and not very wise. That's how I would define it.
I want to ask probably my final question, and then we'll turn to Q&A from the audience. We'll get your thoughts, Imam, and then finally from Rabbi. Nations have struggled with diversity among its members, whether we speak of Nazi Germany's persecution of European Jews, the American legacy of slavery and Jim Crow, or the current Sunni-Shia conflict among the global Muslim community. Tolerance and diversity have not always gone hand in hand. So is diversity a cause or an antidote for extremism? What role does diversity play?
I mean, what happens is that people resist change. And Samuel Huntington wrote a book some years ago before he passed away called Who Are We? I don't know if you've got a chance to read, where he talked about the changing nature of the American collective identity from the white Anglo-Saxon Protestant to being a much more diverse, ethnically diverse, religiously diverse nation. But that is the way the United States is going. And that is something that is happening, and we can't change that fact. I believe diversity is the best state of any nation, because diversity enriches a state. The Egypt that I remember until the 1960s, Egypt was not uniformly all Egyptian. We had communities from the time of Alexander the Great, Greek communities. Alexandria was the majority Greek city, as were many parts of modern Turkey. Izmir, ancient Smyrna, Cappadocia, what was called Sparta. These are all parts of modern Turkey. Until the end of the Ottoman Empire, many of these areas were Greek towns and Greek cities. The Turks ruled over Turks and Greeks and Azeris and Arabs and Bosnians and Albanians, all kinds of people. Egypt had Greeks, had Italian communities from the time of Julius Caesar. We had Armenians. And this is what enriched our communities. We know today in America that it is immigrants that have enriched this country. Diversity enriches a country in every single way. And societies evolve. I'm not the same person I was 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago. None of us is. Countries evolve, societies evolve. We're all evolving and changing. The Israel that was founded in 1948 is totally different from modern Israel today. Diversity enriches us, and even our identity of our foods. When I grew up as a young boy in Cambridge, my father was studying in England. fish and chips was the national food. Today it's chicken tikka masala. I mean, before the Italians, pizza was not an American food. You know, macaroni and cheese and pizza are considered American foods. Not before the Italians came here. I mean, I remember when I was remembering to myself, I was on a flight from the West Coast, and I heard one of the flight attendants saying, "Hey, Liz, do you have any hummus?" I said, "Wow, 40 years ago in this country, hummus was not known by Americans. Now hummus is in every place you turn, there's hummus." You know, it's become an American food. So my point is that diversity enriches us, and as time goes on, we all become part of that. What was originally diversity becomes seen as part of who we are, and that's what we are about. That's what makes America great. That is what made Egypt great in the past. That's what made the Ottoman Empire so great. And when we reverse the diversity of a country, we impoverish a country.
Certainly. Thank you for that. So. I want to now turn to our Q&A portion of the event and give you a chance also, Rabbi, to respond to the question I asked about diversity and add another one. Of course, you brought up the subject of food, and food conquers all, but there are also food wars, namely among the Palestinians and Israelis. Who was the inventor, or who was the first, shall we say, cooker of hummus or falafel or whatever it is, right? So that has a... That's Egyptian. That's Egyptian. Well, that's our... So that's our... So we're not totally out of the weeds when we talk about food. I want to ask, Robert, we have a question here. Critics say that it is in Israel's interest to maintain the status quo with respect to the Palestinians and never giving them, not really giving in to a two-state solution nor giving them equal rights. What are your thoughts on that, and will there ever be a win-win solution?
Well, first I want to respond to the earlier question. Speaking of the hummus, this is the important question, the hummus question. Jewish food, I don't know if you've ever had the chance to taste Jewish food. It doesn't exist, actually, because it's all borrowed from somewhere else. You know, it's all of it. It's just, when it's made kosher, it's Judified, but it's really borrowed from somewhere else. I personally, look, if you get two Jews in a room, you know the story, the rest of the line. You get at least 3 or 4 different opinions. I don't agree with that. I think the status quo is not good for Israel. Would you read the question again so that I have the exact language? I want to make sure that I...
The exact question is, critics say that it is in Israel's interest to maintain the status quo.
Yes, okay, so, it's in Israel. I don't think it's in Israel's interest to maintain the status quo because it's not good. There's fear, there's violence, there are lots of problems, and it's not getting better, it's getting worse. The problem is, I can tell you from the Israeli Jewish perspective, as Imam Feisal said, 20% of the population of Israel are Arabs, mostly Muslim, some Christian. They are equal under the law, and they have representation in parliament. They're not equal culturally. There's a lot of prejudice against Arabs in Israel. Right? So there's a difference between under the law and how they're actually treated in the country. The Jewish Israelis deeply fear the Palestinians outside the country, although increasingly also Palestinian Israelis or Arab Israelis. There's a lot of discussion about how Palestinian or Arab Israelis want to be called citizens of the State of Israel who are ethnically Arab. The fear is that if Israel, this is a general fear. I'm not telling you, by the way, that this is true or not. I'm only telling you this is the fear. The fear that most Israeli Jews have is that if land is given and there is a Palestinian state, that will be used as a jumping board to destroy the state of Israel and to kill more Israeli Jews. That's the fear. And it's very difficult to overcome that kind of fear when you have actions that are interpreted by Israelis as attempts to do just that. I'm being very careful with my words because I'm not claiming that the shooting of rockets from Gaza into the southern part of Israel, kind of random shooting of rockets, is intended to destroy the Jewish state or to just murder Israelis. There are good political reasons for this. There are military reasons for this, and I don't condone the kind of acts, but that is interpreted by Israeli Jews as random attempts to simply kill Jews. Now, Jews have a lot of experience being victims, and Jews have recorded that experience and we're talking about cultural latent prejudice. You know, cultures also absorb attitudes about themselves and other communities as well. And within the Jewish community, there's a kind of a trauma, a deeply embedded trauma and fear of destruction, that we're going to be destroyed. Some people make a joke and they say, we are the ever-dying people, right? We didn't quite die last generation, but we might die this generation. And so that informs a lot of Israeli behavior. That informs some of the craziness that you see in Jewish statements in this country as well, because there is this kind of deeply culturally embedded fear that people want to destroy the Jewish people. And that fits in the Israeli context. So no, I think the status quo is not healthy for Israel, but the question is constantly, how do you demonstrate to the community, both the Israelis and the Palestinians, the Israeli Jews and the Palestinian Arabs, inside and outside the state of Israel, that they can trust the other side? There is tremendous lack of trust. And I think that is what's keeping things from moving forward, and nobody has been able to transcend that recently.
I'm mindful of the time. Thank you so much. And so I have a question here from Dr. Milton Boniuk, who I'm grateful and recognize in the audience. Thank you for coming. Of course, he's the founder and primary donor of the Boniuk Institute. And the question is for you, Imam Feisal, and it echoes other questions. We have several questions about the root cause of the Sunni-Shia conflict. If you could just basically speak about what is the root cause of the Sunni-Shia conflict.
Well, the historical original cause was really the battle over who should be the leader of the community. Should the leader of the community be from one of the descendants of the Prophet with the line of Ali, who was married to his daughter Fatima, his sons Al-Hassan, Hussein, and that bloodline, or could be from any of the community? But that is no longer relevant to today's reality. All conflicts, in fact, as I written in my book, What's Right with Islam, is when two parties fight for something which they value. Most conflicts are over political power and over things of economic value, land, water rights, two guys fighting for the love of a woman. I mean, two parties fighting over something is always the root cause of something. And once the conflict lasts a period of time, we read into our difference the basis of we attribute whatever it is to the conflict to whatever differentiates us. So if it's between men and women, we call it a gender conflict. If it's between different races, we call it a racial conflict. If it's between Catholics and Protestants in Ireland, we call it a sectarian conflict, although that conflict in Ireland is really about economics, about the frustration of the Irish Catholics over not having parity with the Irish Protestants in the political and economic pie. Today, what has happened in the region is that in Bahrain, for example, the Bahraini Shia feel they don't have parity with the Sunnis, who are a minority and who control the country and who rule the country. And they are supported by Iran, which sees itself as the protector or defender of the Shia community worldwide, and Saudi Arabia, on the other hand, which sees itself as as a defender of the Sunni faith worldwide, and they have just further aggravated the Sunni-Shia conflict. It has happened also in Iraq, because during Saddam Hussein's time, where he suppressed the Shia and treated them very, very horribly. And so we see the conflict in Lebanon, in Bahrain, in Yemen today, in Iraq, and it's not getting any better. And it has created an increasing polarization between Saudi Arabia and Iran, who are really shaping to a large extent, or who have shaped to a large extent, the current geopolitical conflict in the region. They are the major geopolitical players. Then, of course, the larger players, the United States, Russia, and the European Union as the greater military powers who are playing in the region. So it's like three-dimensional chess with these three layers. But the Shia-Sunni conflict is part of it, but it's essentially about power, fundamentally. I would like to...
Could I add just a very short piece? And as you mentioned also, I think Saudi Arabia, for example, its claim to legitimacy is a strong kind of fundamentalist Sunni expression of Islam, which is by definition anti-Shia. Am I right about that? Right. And part of the very authority for the Islamic State of Iran is a super Shiism identity. So I think you have also a religification of political rivalries between two countries that define their political rivalry in religious terms, which is not necessary.
That is true. That is certainly true. But in most of these regions, the conflict really has to do. I mean, let's say if you take, just to make my point, if we solve the real estate issue, conflict in Israel between Israelis and Palestinians, and the power and economic parity which you referred to I mean, the reason why the 1948 Israelis, as they are called, the Palestinians who live within Israel, are conflicted, is because they are the most well-educated, economically better off than the Palestinians, the West Bank, Palestinians, and Gaza. So although they relate to the Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza, they are happier living in Israel because they are more successful, they are wealthier, and so forth. So to me, if you solve the political and economic issue and the parity issue, it will go a long way to solving the religious issues. Similarly, between Shia and Sunni in Bahrain, in Iraq. I mean, if the United States, if Paul Bremer and in the immediate aftermath of Saddam Hussein, we had not made the Iraqi Sunnis feel denied and oppressed by the majority Iraqi Shias, we wouldn't have had ISIS today. ISIS is essentially, at its core, the movement for parity by Sunnis in Iraq and Syria. But they rebranded themselves as Islamic State because that way they can recruit from all over the world. But their original cause was really the lack of parity, the desire for parity by the Sunnis of Iraq and Syria to their Shia counterparts.
Absolutely. Very, very important. I'm sure that much more can be expounded upon just that subject. There are numerous questions. I think we can only squeeze in maybe one or two more. So I'll paraphrase. We hear about Judeo-Christian ethics, Judeo-Christian tradition, Judeo-Christian civilization, and I forget now, of course, there's the book, A Case for Judeo-Islamic Civilization. So I would like to ask Rabbi about what are your thoughts on Judeo-Islamic ethics, Judeo-Islamic tradition?
The book is for Christio-Islamic tradition. Yeah, I don't like the term, and I'll tell you why the term is divisive in two different ways. Judeo-Christian, some Jews use the term too, I think mistakenly. Judeo-Christian presumes the following. it's Judeo-Christian. The Judeo was necessary to get people moving in the right direction, but it culminates in the perfection of the Christian. That's what Judeo-Christian is all about. That's why people who use the term Judeo-Christian don't like the idea of Judeo-Christian Islamic, because so that there is, I think, deeply embedded in that term an anti-Jewish sentiment in Judeo-Christian. There's another part of that, and that is that's Jews and Christians have something in common in opposition to Islam. So that's also divisive. So the Judeo-Christian notion, the terminology, I think is problematic. And when I make these comments, if I were you, I'd probably be thinking, well, isn't that just some semantic? He's talking about semantics. But actually, the use of terms makes a difference, and it affects the way we think about things. And oftentimes, it's convincing in a kind of subconscious way. So I think we need to be careful about the kind of terminology we use. And it's not just to be PC, I think it's to be inclusive. So I don't like the term.
I would like to squeeze in one last question for the Imam. There are numerous questions about Sharia in the American context. Of course, a number of years ago, there was some anxiety about no Sharia in America. Certainly in Texas and Oklahoma, North Carolina, there were movements and legislation against Sharia. And so there are a number of questions about what would Sharia look like in America? What are its prerequisites? Also some questions asking about what does Sharia how does Sharia address pretrial discovery, cross-examination, precedent, national law, things, if you could just speak a little bit about that.
Very briefly, the Muslim scholars have also, analogously to what Professor Reuven has pointed out, have said that Muslims living in any other country have to follow the law of the land. And this began ever since the community of the Prophet's followers, whom he sent to Abyssinia under the Christian king, have existed in Abyssinia, today modern Ethiopia, continuously. There's been a minority of Muslims. So based upon that and other minority Muslims, we always have to obey the law of the land. That's number one. Number two, if you take away the issue of the penal code, our law is pretty much, not contradictory to other systems of law. The development of jurisprudence, discovering all the things that have been done here are certainly in keeping. In fact, one of the scholars here, who was the now retired Chief Justice of Malaysia, was involved in expanding the Sharia courts in Malaysia using the instruments of civil law and the processes in the civil courts, which has happened in this. So this borrowing is certainly there. Now, on the positive side, we are practicing Islamic law in this country. I mean, just like you have in our dietary laws, we have dietary laws which we practice. I conduct weddings in New York and all of the country for that matter. I'm licensed by the state of New York, the city of New York, to conduct weddings according to Sharia law. So our dietary laws, the way we bury our dead in this country, the way we slaughter our animals in this country, many aspects of personal status law we practice. There's no contradiction with American law in this country. As far as criminal law, just like in almost every country, even in Muslim majority countries, the rules regarding criminal law and law of contracts have become far more dominated by the introduction of Western systems of law. So even Egypt, Turkey, as they modernized, they adopted, the French code, and it's kind of like India, Malaysia adopted British law because they were British colonies, and all those have become now the existing laws of many of those Muslim majority countries. So the attempt to create this divisiveness between Sharia and other systems of law is really an exaggerated claim. Finally, just as one point, we need to Rabbi's comment, I think it's important for us to look at the telescope from God's point of view rather than from our worldly point of view. Just like we shifted from a geocentric to a heliocentric point of view and understanding the planetary movement of the bodies, are more elegant and easy to understand. We need to change our system of perception from what I call a geocentric religious worldview to a theocentric religious worldview. Because if you look at it from God's point of view, you know, Moses, Jesus, Muhammad did not come to teach different religions. They came to teach the same God's religion. You know, it's not about Jesus Inc., Moses Inc., Muhammad Inc. It's about God Inc., with each of these as regional managers equivalent. And I mean, Jesus did not come to teach, he did not think of himself as starting a new religion. And the same thing with Muhammad. If we can look at it that way, and then we can think of each other as actually part of the same religion, because that's what we really all are. And that's what I mean by being imprisoned and in these cages of semantic differentiation. If you look at it from God's point of view, you're either a submitted believer or you are a rejecter of God. You accept God, we are all in one community. Rejectors of God are one community in terms of their belief system.
I think we're over time, so I'm just going to get one minute final thought from you. Please go ahead.
I wonder if I was stuck on the plane. We couldn't take off because of your weather here in Houston. Nothing personal. And I had a few minutes, so I jotted something down, and I would like to share it with you. It'll only take about 45 minutes, so. These were my thoughts in the airplane. Religion or faith provides a unique way of thinking about the world because of the assumptions that underlie it. Politics is a different way of thinking about the world, and it is based on a different set of assumptions. So is philosophy, a different way of thinking about the world. They all overlap to a certain extent, but each also has its own unique aspects. There are also other ways to make sense of the world, through ethnic or tribal categories, for example, or pure economics. All overlap in certain respects, and because of that, people can mistakenly essentialize the differences and claim that they're all simply political, as in all religions are really politics, or something like that, or all religions care only about the bottom line of wealth acquisition or power. But these reductive views entirely misunderstand the unique aspects and nature of each world of perception. Religion has in its repertoire an extremely important and unique contribution that's lacking from all the others. What could that be? It's that religion acknowledges the ultimate, transcendent, and extraordinary greatness of God. And that's an acknowledgement of human humility. You don't get that humility in politics or from ethnic worldviews. It's certainly not found in economic perceptions. But along with the centrality of humility in religion is the lurking evil of self-satisfaction that some religious people mistakenly think comes from their belief in God. They seem to think that being firm in faith gives them license to shame or demean those who do not share their belief. But God's greatness is so unfathomable that we cannot really capture it fully in any theology. Even Scripture, which derives from God, cannot really come even close to making sense of God, because all Scripture is conveyed in human language. And human language is limited. Human language is incapable of articulating the transcendent, incomprehensible reality that is divinity. So we struggle in our respective faith traditions to make sense of God and the world around us, knowing that we don't have the whole picture, but we do have each other, and we can learn from one another. We can learn wisdom from the faith of our brothers and sisters within and outside of our faith traditions. When we work together, we bring the world closer together, and when we do that, we all get closer to God.
Thank you, Dr. Firestone, and thank you, Imam Feisal, for really an extraordinary event. I hate to follow up such eloquence with anything I have to say, but I do have to bring us to close. And I want to remind the audience, I want to thank you for coming and remind you that there is, of course, a book signing outside. You'll have an opportunity to meet and greet with the speakers insofar as they have time to. I want to thank, of course, the World Affairs Council of Greater Houston, and the Banyak Institute for the Study and Advancement of Religious Tolerance. And I want to thank you again for coming. I'm sure you agree that our speakers are leaders in their community and that they are tremendous intellects, but they're also two tremendously kind-hearted human beings. And that's the kind of sober, sensitive discussion that we desperately need today. And so I'm sure you would not hesitate in showing one more time our warm gratitude to our speakers.